Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and we're going to talk a little bit about some issues as it relates to the Department of Veterans Affairs and their IT system. Over the last week and a half, there have been reports in the press that in fact there has been a data breach of the VA system that in fact may have put at risk all of the veterans in this country's personally identifiable information. At a hearing last week, during the course of an investigation that our committee has been working on, in fact, we learned that since March of 2010, VA has been hacked by multiple foreign state actors. These groups have penetrated VA's IT system and stolen large quantities of data. The problem is we don't know what data has been taken out because as they went in, they encrypted what they removed out of the system. But the clues that they left behind indicate that the data was personally identifiable information such as names, addresses, social security numbers, birth dates, and an untold number of veterans and their dependents could in fact be at risk at this point. So on our June 4th hearing, it focused on VA's IT and their challenges and our committee's ongoing investigation to those particular challenges. But this is exactly what congressional oversight is supposed to do. So I'd say because of our committee's efforts, specifically those of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, chaired by Mike Coffman of Colorado, and the ranking member is Kirkpatrick from Arizona. We were able to discover that their network was penetrated by hackers, potentially, again, putting at risk personally identifiable information of some 20 million veterans in this company. Our hearing was significant because it was the first time, the very first time, that we were able to get VA to admit that its network had been breached, despite repeated requests by our Committee for Information, despite the fact that the Inspector General had said that they had problems with their IT system. And I want to point, if I can, very quickly to these documents over here that will point to questions that Mr. Coffman asked during the committee. In fact, the question to Mr. Warren, who was the witness who was under oath at the time, he asked at a foreign network entity targeted and penetrated the VA's network. The answer was that he was aware of a single incident, one single incident. Subsequent to that, the question was asked by Mr. Hulskamp, have they identified more than one foreign state actor that in fact had penetrated the network? The answer was yes. Then when we tried to drill down and follow a little bit further into that as to how many, they were unable to answer that question, how many times they in fact had been penetrated. This goes directly against a letter that was sent to the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Coffman, from the secretary.
Microphones, please.
This goes directly against a letter that was given to Mr. Coffman when he sent an inquiry to the secretary as to how safe the IT system was in the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I just highlight the one line specifically that the secretary sent back in his response. To be clear, VA security posture was never at risk. We in fact know that that is not a truthful statement. And again, unfortunately, it bears the secretary's signature on the letter. And we are here today to announce some things that we have asked the VA to do. Number one, I think first and foremost, is to ask the VA to provide credit monitoring for all of the veterans in this country. A private company would do that, and there is absolutely no reason that the Department of Veterans Affairs should not be required to do the same thing. We're talking about personally identifiable information, again, including Social Security's, birth dates, names, address, telephone numbers. VA should do that. People will ask, how will they afford to do that? Certainly there is money that the VA can use, and I think one of the best ways is probably to look at the money that they have been using for bonuses for executives around the Department of Veterans Affairs to be able to provide this credit monitoring. The other thing is we have asked the VA to provide an additional brief to us, and we've agreed in that brief to allow them to do it in private. It's not a classified brief, but they want to be able to provide the information to us in private as to issues as it pertains to their network and their system. The other thing is we want to know exactly what the VA is doing to hold the people accountable that are responsible within the system for these breaches of the IT system. So with that, I would like to introduce my ranking member, Mike Michaud from Maine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you all know, troubling information has surfaced as a result of the cybersecurity hearing held by our O&I subcommittee last week. And I also want to thank Chairman Coffman and Ranking Member Kirkpatrick for their work on this issue. As Chairman Miller laid out, there has been a security breach to the Department of Veterans Affairs IT network, and it's possible some veterans' information has been compromised. I'm disappointed that we had to find out about this through a public hearing. I would much have preferred had the Department of Veterans Affairs informed us on this issue on an ongoing, open, and transparent engagement. We have a partnership with VA to keep faith with the men and women who sacrifice to protect our country. While failures need accountability, my primary interest is not pointing fingers or assigning blame. I'm more interested in moving forward quickly to determine the full extent of any problems that were identified and try to find fixes to those problems. As we move forward, I hope that all interested parties will join us in solving this immediate problem before us today and not play politics with our veterans and their security. We must be result-oriented. At this point in time, I would like to get more information from the Secretary to better understand what has occurred and what plan the Department of Veterans Administration has to solve these problems. When we get the questions from our veterans, we will need to also be able to provide our veterans with complete and honest answers. The VA has worked to serve the needs of our veterans who earned their benefits. The VA has a responsibility to work just as hard to protect that personal information that they have on our veterans. Chairman Miller and I are united in our concerns over this issue and in our commitment to getting to solutions for our veterans. And I want to make that clear. We are united in this effort. He has laid out an oversight and investigation plan that has been worked by both our staffs, majority and minority, to resolving this situation is a primary goal of ours, and it should be the primary goal of the VA as well. And I expect other agencies to be included in this as well when you look at the Department of Homeland Security to play their appropriate role in this regard. The issue and concerns of our veterans have no party lines, and I'm very pleased that the chair of the full committee as well as chair and ranking members of the subcommittees have played that role throughout this Congress. And I look forward to moving this issue to the next step, and I look forward to working with the chairman as we bring the VA in to try to get answers to the questions that we have on this very serious security breach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And again, before we go to questions, I want to say, obviously, it's very troubling that this incident has occurred. What's even more troubling is that the law requires the Department of Veterans Affairs to notify Congress when there's been a breach of their system of this type. They did not notify Congress that this breach had actually occurred. So, again, as Mike has already said, we have asked for an open, transparent process between our committee and the Department of Veterans Affairs. We have said it over and over again. We want to be a partner to better serve our veterans. They served us. We want to serve them. We can't do it from an adversarial position. And with that, we'll be glad to take any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
at the June 4th hearing, under Mr. Coffman's questioning, it became clear it's possible some private information to veterans has been exposed. It's possible. How likely is it? How grave is the risk of identity theft, of credit card theft, or fraud on the nation's veterans?
Very much so. If their system can be pierced this easily, they can go in and withdraw any amount of information. What concerns me even more than that is, can a foreign state actor go in through the VA system and access other information within the federal government? Use it as a backdoor way to access other IT systems within this federal system. So I would say that the chances are pretty good, in fact, that information, in fact, was removed. Unfortunately, we don't know until somebody actually comes up and says that their information was used in a nefarious way. That's why we're asking the VA, in fact, to provide credit monitoring for the veterans in this country.
The agency has said it makes that monitoring available. I think, in fact, Mr. Warren said it to Mr. Coffman during the hearing, that they already provide that service. You're looking for a little more exhaustive credit reporting?
Well, I think that if they specifically have an issue arising with an individual veteran, they do. But what I think is so disturbing about this particular incident is, first of all, they misled Congress. I mean, if we look at this letter by the Secretary that says, to be clear, VA security posture was never a risk. It certainly was. It was hacked. And so the fact is that we don't know what they took. But I believe that they had a responsibility to the men and women who serve this country to notify them at that point, at the point that they knew that they were hacked, to watch their own financial affairs, to make sure that nothing was to occur. They had a moral obligation, if not a legal obligation, to do that. And so they failed to do that. They failed to be honest with Congress. And so now it's a matter of staying on top of them and on this particular issue to make sure that they do have the appropriate security procedures in place to where this doesn't happen again.
I would also add that VA in the past, when laptops have been lost or stolen, where they've been able to identify particularly who was on that, what information was on that laptop, they provided that credit monitoring for those veterans. In fact, this was the entire system. Let's also talk about the fact that something is going awry within their IT system when they can lose $500,000, permanently delete $500,000 VA loan records that have been lost to the ether out there on some 400,000+ veterans.
And let me just say that it's really important that we clarify exactly what happened and get answers. As a former prosecutor, I know how important it is to get good, honest information, and that's the stage we are right now. Out of that, we'll be able to develop a plan to make sure this doesn't happen again. But I think we need to be very careful about talking about the extent of this until we know exactly what happened. And that's what the committee's working with the VA right now. Because this is not a partisan issue. Making sure our veterans are protected and get the services they need is not a partisan issue. It's a national responsibility, but we need to do it very carefully.
Chairman, just ask for a moment here about this, the Research Advisory Board and the change in the charter. There's some issue, if you can for a second, maybe a couple of the other members want to weigh in on this. Do you think that this was, charter was changed because of the issue with the Gulf War illness and the report that came out, and whether or not they could effectively investigate and report on Gulf War illness?
First of all, I'm very troubled by the changes that are purported to have been made. What is very interesting to me is the fact that we were notified that the charter basically had been reinstituted and only administrative changes had been made to the charter. I perceive those changes that have been made are substantive. And there is a reason behind it, and I believe it's important for the Department of Veterans Affairs to fully inform the committee as to the reasons for the changes. I don't know. I wish I could tell you this morning I know exactly why the charter was changed in a substantive way, but I can't answer that question today.
Do you have any suspicions about the Gulf War report and the potential link to this change?
Until I see the actual verbiage, I need to hold comment, but I would say it's very troubling when we are told that it's done from an administrative standpoint technical corrections, if you will, and we find out that they're much more substantive than that.
Chairman
Yes,
Miller,
sir.
VA briefs the committee, both House and Senate, monthly on data breach. They send that report. Reporters are part of their monthly discussion. Is the fact that they haven't told you what's as troubling as obviously as the fact is that they had these problems, even despite the fact that the IG's pointed out for a dozen years or so that they have holes in their systems, that they have these plans of actions and milestones that they're not necessarily ignoring, but they're not fixing? I mean, that seems to be that there's some dishonesty is maybe not the best word for that from my perspective, but do you see this as, were they being dishonest with you or just not telling you the whole truth?
It appears that VA was not following the law. And the law is notification of Congress, and that notification was not done. And with that, Mike, if you want to add.
Right, it was not done. Not only was it not done, but when asked about it, they denied that their system had been breached. It was only when a whistleblower stepped forward who had been responsible for the system and who had left the VA that the truth came out. If not for that whistleblower, we may not know that the system had been hacked today.
You call for accountability. Are you thinking somebody should lose their job? Should someone be demoted? I mean, this is not obviously a one-person thing. This is a systemic issue at VA dating back well before the 2006 laptop incident.
Well, I would say this. I don't know what it takes to get fired at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It seems like everybody gets a bonus and nobody gets fired. And if you do something wrong, you don't get fired, you just get moved to another position. This is an incident where somebody knew, somebody misled, it appears, the secretary, and I believe that person needs to be held accountable. If it's more than one person, absolutely, there needs to be disciplinary action up to and possibly including termination of employment.
I think on that issue, we have to get the facts out, and that's why the chairman and I agreed on the step forward, how we can get all the information, and then we can look at, first of all, why there is a discrepancy between what staff says and what the secretary had written to the chairman, Coffman, and then where do we go from here? The bottom line is, how do we make sure that we protect the information the veterans have, would appear to be breached, and that's a big issue that we're definitely looking at.
I agree. I mean, as I said, it's very important that we carefully look at what happened. Hiring and firing decisions, though, are for the administration. Congress's job is to do the oversight and investigation, which we're doing in our committee, and I commend Chairman Coffman on his work in that regard. So we really want to get honest answers for our veterans. They deserve that. They've earned that. That's our focus.
And I just think if Secretary Shinseki is at all concerned about the integrity of his department, he will in fact discipline those responsible who misled him and to give him the wrong information where in fact he did mislead Congress by virtue of the facts that he was given.
Have you had any discussions since the hearing with the VA about whether there should be credit reports made available? Any discussion about follow-up from the VA to maybe clarify when and what information was taken?
We have done a joint letter, the ranking member and I together, to the secretary, recommending what we feel like would be a good course of action. Again, as Ann has said, we don't micromanage the Department of Veterans Affairs, but we can sure make suggestions on behalf of the American people and certainly the veteran population. We have made the suggestion to the department as to what they should do in regards to protecting the veterans' credit files, and that's through a monitoring system. We have agreed to go into a private setting with the department and let them brief us again as to how serious this is. They asked to do it in a top secret briefing. There isn't a top secret briefing with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I serve on the Intelligence Committee, and what the Department of Veterans Affairs needs to do is just tell the truth, and let's work on a way to solve the problem that exists.
Got time for one more.
Can
Can I just ask, to be sure, you want blanket credit monitoring since it's unclear what files left the system?
I think unless they can figure out exactly what information, in fact, has been retrieved
Right.
out of the system, blanket credit monitoring is going to be the only way that we can ensure that any veteran out there, credit is not going to be potentially harmed by some foreign state actor. These weren't hackers in a garage just trying to make a statement. The information was withdrawn from the VA system very systematically and done very professionally.
Any idea what the cost of blanket credit monitoring?
We have to
would be?
discuss that with the department. I'm sure they'll have a better idea as to the answer to that. But we're not just talking about 20+ million veterans. We're talking about veterans and their dependents as well. So their family members' personally identifiable information could have also been compromised as well. And with that, we appreciate it. We've got a vote we've got to go to on the floor. Thank you.